There is an inexpensive application we can get for our mobile devices called the photographer's Ephemeris. It'll show us exactly where the sun and the moon will rise and set on any day of the year, anywhere on Earth. That's quite staggering when you stop and think about it. Let me explain how I used it recently visiting a place I'm not familiar with. Canon Sands on Australia's east coast. It's about 500k north of Brisbane. I had just settled into a rented cabin after my journey, bought a few beers, and with the late afternoon approaching, I had just enough time for a search using the photographer's Ephemeris. Now in my case, I could place the pointer in any location along any of the beaches to see just where I need to be and to have a good view to the west. Now that's not always easy to find when you're on the east coast, but I could quickly see that Canoe Point was the place to be. Now once we settle on a location, we can then switch to satellite mode, and here we can see some very interesting features. We can see that there's rocks on the beach and they can form some good foreground interest, but look at those sandbars. We can see some lovely sweeping curves that have great photographic potential. At certain states of the tide, we may be able to walk out on those sandbars. High and low tides for that day or future days can very easily be found on our mobile devices. So from my armchair with a beer in hand and my iPad, I can see where I need to be, what the state of the tide is, what time I need to be there, and even how long it's going to take me to drive there. And it worked pretty well. Let me take you through a few images that I captured there with my Canon R5 mirrorless camera with a 16 to 35mm wide-angle lens. As soon as I arrived on the beach, I started shooting images. I don't see any point in waiting around because I don't know how the sunset will pan out. It could, and sometimes does, come to nothing. But the light was beginning to fall, so f/22 did allow a slow enough shutter speed to capture a little movement in the water. All the images were shot from a tripod, so 100 ISO was my choice. The focal length here for a nice composition was 35mm. In this shot, the colour can be seen building up in those clouds, and I've zoomed out to 15mm, and that lens really does a great job capturing that sky. I've chosen f/22 again to give that slow shutter speed, but to be honest I'm a little bit too far from the water to show much movement. But we are on a tripod, so there's no problem with these settings. Now with this shot I've turned around to look towards the east. Sometimes I found that I can get mesmerised by the setting sun and forget what's behind me. Nothing overly spectacular, but a very nice seascape I think, where the colours and depth look quite nice to me. What drives my choice of zoom? Well, it's the composition, and here it's 35mm. Another view looking east, but making use of the lines in the sand pointing towards the centre of the image, and the rocks doing exactly the same thing, but from the other side. I've opened up the aperture to capture the water a bit sharper, and 35mm was the zoom setting. Now it's only a few minutes on, but we can see some more colour building up in that sky, even though we're looking eastwards. When we're trying to capture moving water, it's important to take a number of different shots. Capture that water in various stages. Now here I think it's paid off rather well with those nice shapes at the water's edge as the water comes to a stop on the sand. And I'm back to that 15mm zoom setting, which I do rather like. Now when we turn back to a westerly view, we can see what a few minutes can do to our scene. I'm always looking for some foreground detail. so my images have a feeling of depth. Even a washed up log can do that for us. It does give the feeling that we're looking into a scene rather than at a flat image. Now there's nothing very special with the settings here, all quite predictable. But you may notice I did increase the ISO to 400 because the wind became extremely gusty. Now I suppose in hindsight I could have switched the Canon R5 image stabilization back on and then kept the ISO at 100. I always turn off the stabilization when my camera is on a tripod. Mother Nature giving us some colour, and that lovely 15mm wide angle lens captures it nicely. So a Canon R5, the photographer's Ephemeris, and a beach at sunset, and we can't go wrong. Here we are on another night, same beach, and I actually got rained off the beach, but not before I captured a few pictures. I'll see you next time.